Hey guys, DMS here. Today I have for you a review of the JDS Labs Atom Amplifier. This is a budget amp at just $100. It's in the right price range to compete with things like the Magni 3 and the Liquid Spark. So, is it any good? Let's find out. By the way, you guys seemed to like the widescreen from last time, but wanted it a little bit wider, so here you go. As you guys may or may not have noticed, I started shooting my videos on anamorphic lenses. I figured that might be kind of cool. So anyway, right off the bat, I noticed this thing is not like the Element from JDS Labs in the sense that it is made out of plastic. But that hasn't stopped them from sticking to their traditional matte black finish and a somewhat similar shape. Now I am glad to see that on this one, they put little bitty ridges around these rubber feet to stop them from slipping away, and I haven't had any issues with them sliding off on this unit as opposed to my EL stack. Feature-wise, this has RCA in, RCA out, and a 3.5mm in, as well as a 16-volt AC input, not DC. And on the front, it has a 1/4-inch headphone output, a pot with a volume clicker built in so it turns on when you start turning the volume up, as well as a gain switch and an input switch. Now that input switch is to switch between the RCA and 3.5mm inputs, and the gain switch should be pretty obvious. It's to switch between low and high gain. And it's worth noting that since this has RCA out, it is actually a preamp controlled by this volume knob here, and the gain switch for low and high also affects the RCA out. So all that's cool, but how does it stack up? Well, right off the bat, this thing sounded so clean to me for a $100 amp that I needed to go online and find some measurements to confirm. So I went to Audio Science Review and checked some measurements that they made, because I do not have the equipment necessary to measure amps. It is a very, very expensive process. And their measurements seem to back up exactly what I heard, which is crazy for an amp of this price range. So here's some graphs comparing the distortion versus power ratios of these amplifiers, the Liquid Spark, the Magni 3, and the JDS Labs Atom. It's extremely surprising to me how well this is performing against the other amps, considering they're at the same price. Now I imagine that JDS Labs was able to save on some costs with the housing, considering it is plastic, versus the Magni 3 here, with their nice aluminum housing. So I will say that Magni definitely takes the cake on build quality, but JDS Labs is definitely taking the cake on ergonomics because the switches and buttons are on the front of the amp, which just makes sense. I don't like having to go behind my amp and doing this and hoping that I'm flipping gain and not power. I actually got that right that time, gain and power. I guess I've used this amp enough. Not only that, the noise floor and compression on this amp are insane. The only time I'd ever have issues with any sort of noise was when I was messing with different DACs, and I would use a DAC that had inherent noise problems with not just this amp, but any amp I'd plug into it. But when plugging this into the EL DAC, to the Black Labels DAC, to even the iFi iDSD Pro, which by the way is a very expensive DAC. How much is that? $2,499, which in itself is kind of insane that I went to the point of wanting to test this with a $2,499 DAC. But I did, and crazy enough, this could very easily discern the difference between $300 DACs and $2,400 DACs. Now, am I saying to go out and get a $2,400 DAC? No, I'm not. If you're buying a $2,400 DAC, you can probably buy a more expensive amp. And speaking of more expensive amps, this is not better than the EL amp by any means, but $100. And we're getting this level of transparency. I find that very, very impressive. Now, on the high gain mode, it would take until about 2/3 to 1/2 volume to power 600 ohm headphones or T50s, which are notoriously hard to drive, to a reasonably loud listening level. Now, this could, around 2 o'clock, bring them to a level that is far too painful for me to listen to, but that's going to vary from person to person. Now, it is worth noting that the Magni 3 from Schiit produces about double the power as far as wattage is concerned as the Atom amp. However, if you've seen my Magni 3 review, you'll notice that I complain a fair bit about the Magni 3's both glare and compression issues. Two things that I do not have an issue with on the Atom amp. I think the biggest difference between this and the EL amp would be both power and its ability to resolve in the upper mid-range. This certainly does resolve extremely well, far beyond what I would expect for an amp in its price range, but it's definitely not going to resolve mids or highs like something like the EL amp is going to. Not only that, this actually has a lower output impedance than the shit Jotunheim and has a literally perfect, we're actually talking literally perfect to the dot frequency response. The JDS guys told me that they're making their amps based on measurements, and after seeing this, I fully believe it. So, conclusion. Amp reviews aren't very long, but this is where I'm at. This is by far my #1 spot for a $100 amp. This has all the features I could possibly want in both a budget or in a non-budget amp, and I'm curious to see if JDS Labs will expand this stack with a DAC or something else similar. I'm hoping they do. So guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave a like down below and a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. If you want early access to reviews like this one, you can check out my Patreon linked in the video description, and don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more reviews. Until the next one, guys. Peace.